Structural failure is rarely a sudden event. People look at a collapsed bridge or a crumbled foundation and assume it happened in an instant. But as a former combat engineer who transitioned into civil infrastructure, I can tell you that the collapse is just the final, spectacular symptom of a disease that has been quietly festering for years. It starts with microscopic hairline fractures. It starts with stress points being ignored. It starts with arrogant people, assuming that their foundation is untouchable, simply because it looks expensive. I spent 25 years raising my daughter, Emily, as a single father. I built our life with the same meticulous, unyielding discipline I used to calculate load-bearing tolerances. But when Emily got engaged to Ryan Whitmore, a crack appeared in our foundation. And the Whitmore family, with their generational wealth and staggering arrogance, drove a wedge into that crack until it threatened to shatter everything. They assumed I was just a blue-collar nobody they could walk all over. They made one fatal mistake. They never bothered to check who actually owned the ground they were standing on. The moment I realized I was losing my daughter didn't happen in a shouting match. It happened in the suffocating quiet of a private dining room at Veritas, the most exclusive restaurant in downtown Columbus. The kind of place where the lighting is designed to make expensive jewelry sparkle and the waiters move like ghosts. I sat at a sprawling table covered in stark white linen. At 62, I don't fit into these environments, and I don't try to. I wore a clean, pressed suit, but my hands still bore the permanent scars and calluses of 30 years spent handling steel cables and concrete forms. Beside me sat my daughter, Emily, 25 years old, twisting a linen napkin in her lap, her eyes fixed firmly on the table. Across from us sat the Whitmore family. Ryan Whitmore, Emily's fiancé, was a junior partner at a corporate law firm. He wore a bespoke navy suit that draped perfectly over his shoulders and a smile that seemed permanently affixed to his face. The smile of a man who had never once been told no. Next to him sat his father, Harold, a man who assessed every person he met as either an asset or a liability. But the true architect of the evening was Ryan's mother, Patricia Whitmore. Patricia was a master of the invisible knife. She didn't yell. She simply delivered catastrophic insults disguised as polite conversation. The dinner had been an interrogation masquerading as a celebration. They had meticulously dismantled my life. They asked about my house, my retirement, and my vehicle. When I casually mentioned that I still drove a 15-year-old Ford F-150, Patricia offered a sympathetic, deeply condescending smile. "Oh," she said, letting the single syllable hang in the air like a foul odor. "I suppose reliability is more important than aesthetics when you're on a fixed income." Then Harold leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "So, Daniel engineering for the state, correct? Civil work?" "That's right," I answered, my voice deliberately flat. "I don't give up ground to bullies, bridge rehabilitation, structural analysis, and historical preservation. And retirement has been comfortable." Harold pressed, his tone suggesting he doubted it. Before I could answer, Emily interjected, her voice tight. "Dad never really cared about money, he cared about the work." She meant it as a defense, but in the Whitmore ecosystem, a lack of financial ambition was a cardinal sin. Patricia seized the opening instantly. "I'm sure that teaches valuable lessons," she purred, taking a delicate sip of her Chardonnay. Ryan's family, however, has always believed that financial ambition is the cornerstone of a successful marriage. Ryan's father and I built an empire. We believe in measurable success. I held her gaze, refusing to blink. I always figured raising my daughter on my own was measurable enough. The temperature in the room plummeted. Ryan offered a dry, humorless chuckle, attempting to break the tension, and steered the conversation toward the wedding venue. They had selected Oakage Manor, an ultra-exclusive, historically preserved estate located just outside the city limits. It was the crown jewel of Franklin County event spaces, a sprawling 19th-century mansion surrounded by manicured botanical gardens. "It took us months to secure the reservation," Patricia boasted, adjusting her diamond necklace. "The waiting list is notoriously difficult to bypass." Only certain families are even aware the property can be leased for private events. It's a beautiful property, I noted quietly. Patricia raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. You've been there? I wouldn't have thought it was your usual scene, Daniel. There are a lot of old buildings in Franklin County, I replied. It was the truth, but it was heavily redacted. My worn leather briefcase rested on the floor beside my chair. Inside that briefcase sat a thick manila envelope containing the final approval packet for the Whitmore wedding at Oakage Manor. What the Whitmores didn't know, what Emily didn't even know, was that Oakage Manor wasn't owned by a corporation or a wealthy family. It was governed by the Franklin County Historic Preservation Trust. Decades ago, when the manor was on the verge of being demolished due to a failing foundation, I was the structural engineer who fought the city council to save it. I designed the retrofits that kept the walls standing. Following my retirement, the board of directors had asked me to join them. For the past 6 years, I had served as the chairman of the trust. It was a volunteer position, unpaid, no fancy title on my door, but it carried absolute authority. Every single private event held at Oakage Manor required the chairman's final signature to authorize the release of the property. Without my signature, the gates stayed locked. Patricia continued her monologue, her eyes locking onto mine with predatory focus. I suppose Emily had to become independent very young, growing up in a fractured household. I felt the muscles in my jaw tighten. What makes you think single-parent homes require children to mature faster? Patricia, her smile didn't waver. I've read quite a bit about the psychological impact. A lack of a maternal figure often forces the child to overcompensate. We were worried at first, blending two very different calibers of families. She reached across the table and lightly touched Emily's hand. Emily flinched, but didn't pull away. Then, Patricia delivered the kill shot. She looked directly into my eyes, her voice dripping with artificial pity. We knew you were a single father, Daniel, but sitting here with you tonight, now we understand why she left. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a tactical strike, designed to humiliate me, to assert total dominance over my daughter, and to establish the hierarchy of their new family structure. I didn't look at Patricia. I didn't look at Ryan, who sat perfectly still, implicitly endorsing the insult. I didn't look at Harold. I looked at Emily. I waited for the fire. I waited for the daughter I had raised, the fierce, independent girl who used to tackle boys twice her size on the soccer field, to stand up and defend us. I waited for her to throw her napkin on the table and walk out. Instead, Emily folded the corner of her napkin. Twice she stared at her lap, her face flushed with embarrassment, and whispered a sentence that nearly broke me in half. Please, Dad, don't make this awkward. The air left my lungs. She wasn't defending me. She was begging me to surrender. She was choosing the path of least resistance, allowing these wealthy parasites to rewrite our history simply to secure her position in their world. In the military, when a position becomes utterly untenable, you don't throw away your life in a screaming frenzy. You execute a tactical withdrawal. You fall back, regroup, and prepare for a counteroffensive. My bad knee popped loudly as I pushed my chair back and stood up. I picked up my jacket and grabbed my leather briefcase. Dad, Emily asked, her voice trembling slightly, are you leaving? Patricia asked, feigning innocent surprise. I think it's best, I said, my voice dead calm. Ryan frowned, finally speaking up. We're still discussing the venue details. Daniel, the timeline is getting tight, I know, I said. Ryan gestured toward my briefcase. The paperwork the coordinator asked you to bring. The vendor lists, the guest counts. That's in there, isn't it? Maybe we can finish this on Monday. Maybe, I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cause a scene. I simply turned and walked out of the restaurant, leaving them to their victory wine. They thought they had successfully driven the peasant out of the castle. They had absolutely no idea that the peasant was holding the keys to the kingdom. That night, my house felt cavernous and empty. The rain lashed against the windows, a steady, drumming rhythm that matched the cold calculation turning over in my mind. I set the briefcase on the kitchen table, unclasped the brass buckles, and pulled out the Oakage Manor file. Inside was the Whitmore application. It contained hundreds of pages, insurance riders, catering licenses, fire marshal occupancies, and noise variances. But there was a glaring omission: the Code of Event Conduct. 4 years ago, after an intoxicated guest had severely damaged a restored 18th century staircase, the trust had instituted a mandatory conduct agreement. It stipulated that the renting party would treat the property and the staff with absolute respect and accept full financial liability for any damages. It was non-negotiable. Every couple signed it. The Whitmore's signature line was blank. They had simply ignored it, assuming that their wealth and status exempted them from the rules that governed everyone else. I placed my fountain pen next to the file. I didn't sign it. The next morning, my phone rang precisely at 0900 hours. The caller ID displayed Laura Jenkins, the Chief Administrative Coordinator for the Historic Preservation Trust. Laura was a sharp, fiercely dedicated woman who had worked with me for over a decade. "Good morning, Mr. Brooks." Laura greeted me cheerfully. "Morning, Laura. Go ahead. I'm putting together the final packet for the board meeting on Monday. I'm looking at the Whitmore wedding file, and we are still missing your final authorization signature for Oakridge Manor." "I'm aware," I replied, staring at the file on my table. Laura paused, her professional intuition kicking in. "Is there a complication, Daniel?" "There is," I confirmed. "I've reviewed the packet. They haven't signed the mandatory Code of Event Conduct." Laura sighed loudly. "I've sent it to them 3 times, Daniel. Patricia Whitmore's assistant keeps telling me they consider it superfluous administrative red tape and that their umbrella insurance policy covers any issues. Insurance doesn't rebuild historical artifacts, Laura. And wealth doesn't buy exemptions from trust policy." "Understood," Laura said smoothly. She knew my rigid adherence to protocol. "Shall I hold the authorization?" "Hold it. They don't get the venue without the signature." We disconnected. Barely an hour later, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Emily. "Dad, can we please talk?" Before I could respond, a second message arrived. "Ryan feels terrible about last night." I stared at the screen, a bitter laugh escaping my chest. Ryan didn't feel terrible. Ryan felt inconvenienced. I didn't reply. I pocketed the phone and walked out to my workshop. I needed the smell of sawdust and the weight of tools in my hands to keep my focus sharp. By mid-afternoon, the phone rang. I answered it. "Hi, Dad." Emily's voice was small, tentative. "Hello, Emily. I wish you hadn't left last night. I wish I'd had a reason to stay," I countered immediately. Offering no quarter, she inhaled sharply. "Patricia didn't mean what she said. She just has a very blunt way of—" "Stop," I commanded, my voice slicing through her excuses. "Do not explain away someone else's disrespect. You are my daughter. You do not have to apologize for them. I'm just trying to keep everyone together, Dad." "Ryan is stressed. Patricia is demanding. Can you please just sign the paperwork for the venue so we can move forward?" There it was. She didn't call to ask how I was. She didn't call to apologize for abandoning me at the table. She called to extract a signature. "I haven't finished reviewing it, Emily. Dad, please." "They've already booked the caterers. They've paid the deposits. I can't keep telling them, 'We're waiting on you to finalize the vendor lists.'" She still thought my briefcase contained meaningless administrative forms. "I'm not doing this to embarrass you, Emily," I said softly. "Then just sign it," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "I will review the file," I said, and hung up the phone. 10 minutes later, another text arrived. This one was from Ryan. "Daniel, let's not make this personal. Just sign the papers and send them over. Don't ruin this for Emily." I read the message, my jaw clenching so hard my teeth ached. "Let's not make this personal." Ryan Whitmore thought he was dealing with an emotional, easily intimidated old man who could be bullied into compliance. He was about to find out exactly what happens when you threaten an engineer's structural integrity. The siege had begun, and I was holding the high ground. Monday morning arrived with the sterile, bureaucratic efficiency that governed my professional life. The Franklin County Historic Preservation Trust operated out of a repurposed brick courthouse annex. The floors groaned underfoot. The coffee in the break room tasted like battery acid, and everyone knew everyone else's business. It was entirely devoid of the polished glamour the Whitmores required to survive, which is exactly why I loved it. Nobody here cared what brand of watch you wore. They only cared if you showed up to defend the history of the city. I unlocked the side entrance just before 0800 hours. Laura was already at her desk, sorting through a stack of architectural blueprints. "Morning, Mr. Brooks," she said, her eyes warm but sharp. "Morning, Laura. Any updates on the Whitmore file?" She handed me a thick folder. I sent a formal notice regarding the missing code of event conduct. Their response was, less than cooperative. They feel they are being singled out. I took the file, my face expressionless. They are being treated exactly like everyone else. That's what offends them. I walked into my office. It wasn't an executive suite. It had a heavy wooden desk, a pair of slightly mismatched chairs, and walls lined with preservation manuals and structural engineering textbooks. Behind my desk hung a massive framed photograph of Oakage Manor, taken the day we finalized the structural retrofitting that saved the building from demolition. I had stood in the mud for 14 hours that day, directing concrete pours. The Whitmores wanted to parade around the manor for 6 hours. I had bled to ensure it remained standing for another century. I sat down and reviewed the file. Everything was in perfect order except for the unsigned conduct agreement. I pushed the file to the edge of my desk after a grueling 2-hour board meeting discussing roof repairs for a 19th century church. Laura knocked softly on my office door. Her expression was tense. "You have a visitor, Daniel," she said, lowering her voice. "A lawyer." I didn't blink. "Send him in." A man in his early 30s walked into my office. He was the prototype of a junior corporate litigator. Aggressive haircut, razor-sharp suit, carrying a leather portfolio like a weapon. He looked around my modest office with undisguised contempt before projecting a mathematically precise smile. "Mr. Brooks, I'm Kevin Ellis. I represent Mr. Ryan Whitmore." I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands over my stomach. "Take a seat, Mr. Ellis." He remained standing, a deliberate power play. "I'll be brief. My client is deeply concerned that personal disagreements may be delaying the administrative approval of his wedding application at Oakage Manor." "The application is still under review," I replied calmly. "My client believes all technical and financial requirements have been satisfied. They've paid the deposits. They've secured the necessary insurance. We understand that this final signature is merely a formality." "Your understanding is flawed," I said, my voice dropping an octave. I pulled the Whitmore file toward me and slid a single piece of paper across the desk. "The Code of Event Conduct remains unsigned. It is a mandatory requirement for securing the venue." Kevin Ellis glanced at the paper, scoffing lightly. "Mr. Brooks, that's an administrative technicality. Surely an exception can be made for a family of this caliber. Mr. Whitmore believes that withholding approval because of a private family disagreement could expose the trust to significant legal action. We are fully prepared to file an injunction." It was a threat, a blunt, heavy-handed threat designed to intimidate a volunteer board member. The Whitmores believed I would fold the moment a lawyer invoked the word lawsuit. They didn't understand that combat engineers don't negotiate with terrorists. And we certainly don't back down from junior attorneys wearing cheap cologne. I stood up slowly. I didn't raise my voice. I leaned over my desk, planting my scarred hands flat on the wood, closing the distance between us until he was forced to step back. "Mr. Ellis," I said, my voice eerily quiet, "do you know how many weddings I have personally approved for this venue in the last 6 years?" He hesitated, his aggressive posture faltering. "No, neither do I," I said, locking eyes with him. "Because I don't care. I don't remember their last names. I don't care how much money is in their bank accounts. And I certainly don't care what law firm they hire to attempt to intimidate me. I remember whether they respected the process. Your client has failed to respect the process. I am treating Ryan Whitmore exactly the same way I treat everyone else. The moment he signs the agreement, the file moves forward. If he refuses, the gates stay locked. Are we entirely clear?" Kevin Ellis swallowed hard. The absolute, unyielding certainty in my voice shattered his legal posturing. He realized, with terrifying clarity, that he had zero leverage. I wasn't intimidated. I was bored. He slowly reached down and collected the unsigned document. I will. Advise my client of your position, you do that, I said, sitting back down. Close the door on your way out. He left without another word. The office returned to its quiet rhythm. I wasn't worried about a lawsuit. The trust retained legal counsel that would obliterate Ryan's firm in a courtroom. What unsettled me was the sheer arrogance of it. Ryan truly believed I was abusing my power out of petty jealousy. He couldn't comprehend a man simply upholding a standard of integrity. That evening, the pressure escalated. Emily called me, her voice ragged with exhaustion. Ryan told me a lawyer visited you today, she accused, the moment I answered. He did, I confirmed. Ryan hired him to threaten me. Dad, why are you doing this? She pleaded. You know what I mean, the application is basically finished. It's missing a mandatory signature acknowledging the rules of the property, Emily. It's a critical document. They think you're punishing us, she cried. Ryan says if we lose Oakage Manor, his parents will never forgive me. You could finish this today. I could, I agreed calmly. Then why won't you? The question hung in the air. I answered her with the absolute truth. Because once I stop applying the rules equally, they stop meaning anything. If I let them bully me into breaking protocol, I compromise the entire trust. I don't know how to fix this, she sobbed. I feel like everyone expects me to choose between my fiancé and my father. You shouldn't have to, I said quietly, but I am. She shouted, and you're making it impossible. She hung up on me. I sat in my quiet house, staring at the phone. The psychological warfare was taking its toll. The Whitmores were using my daughter as a human shield, forcing her to bear the emotional weight of their arrogance. Sunday arrived, with a heavy gray overcast. I spent the morning in the kitchen, falling back on an old routine. I made a massive pot of chicken noodle soup. When Emily was a child, a bowl of that soup was the universal cure for scraped knees, bad test scores, and broken hearts. The smell of simmering broth and fresh bread filled the house, pushing back the cold reality of the week. At exactly 1 o'clock, tires crunched on the gravel driveway. Emily's SUV parked aggressively. She practically fell out of the driver's seat, looking completely hollowed out. She wore no makeup, her hair was pulled back in a frantic ponytail, and she looked like she hadn't slept in 3 days. I opened the front door and stepped aside. We didn't speak immediately. She walked into the house, absorbing the familiar scents, the ticking of the grandfather clock, the worn, comfortable furniture. She stopped, in the middle of the living room, and finally looked at me. I've missed you, she whispered, her voice cracking. I live 20 minutes away, I said gently. I know. I guided her into the kitchen and set a steaming bowl of soup in front of her. She stared down at the broth, her hands wrapped around the warm ceramic. I haven't had your soup in years, she murmured. You always liked extra crackers, I said, sliding a sleeve across the table. She offered a microscopic smile. You remembered. I remember everything, Emily. We ate in a heavy, loaded silence. It felt like the calm before an artillery barrage. I knew why she was here. She hadn't come just for soup. She had come as an ambassador for the Whitmore regime, sent to secure the final signature. Finally, she set her spoon down. She took a deep, trembling breath. Dad, I know, I said. I'm asking you one more time. Please sign the approval. I folded my napkin with deliberate slowness. Emily, you know the paperwork isn't technically complete. I know, she pleaded, tears immediately springing to her eyes. I know they shouldn't have pushed you. I know Patricia was awful at dinner. But if you sign it, all of this goes away. We can just move past it. I looked at her, truly looking at her. She wasn't defending them anymore. She was broken. She was trapped in a psychological crossfire, convinced that, if she didn't secure this venue, her entire future with Ryan would collapse under the weight of his parents' disapproval. What do you want, Emily? I asked quietly. Not Ryan, not Patricia. What do you want? She closed her eyes, the tears spilling over. I want everyone to stop hating each other. I want my family to be okay. It was the honest plea of a peacemaker. I stood up, walked into the living room, and retrieved my briefcase. I carried it back to the kitchen, and unclasped the heavy leather straps. Emily watched me, a desperate hope blooming in her eyes. I pulled out the Whitmore file and laid it on the table between us. "I knew you'd understand," she breathed, her shoulders instantly relaxing. I didn't confirm or deny. I opened the file, bypassing the vendor contracts and insurance riders, flipping directly to the final page, the chairman's authorization. I reached into my shirt pocket and unscrewed the cap of my fountain pen. The gold nib glinted under the kitchen lights. My signature line waited. Daniel Brooks, Chairman, Franklin County Historic Preservation Trust. Emily let out a long, shuddering sigh of relief. "Thank you, Dad." I held the pen over the paper, but before I could touch ink to paper, the universe intervened. Emily's phone, resting face up on the kitchen table near the file, vibrated violently. A harsh, bright rectangle of light illuminated the wood. Emily glanced at it, then quickly stood up. "I should wash my hands first. I'll be right back." She hurried toward the bathroom down the hall, leaving the phone on the table. I don't make a habit of invading my daughter's privacy. A man's phone is his own business. I didn't touch the device. I didn't need to. The screen lit up again, displaying a large banner notification that was impossible to ignore. The message was from Patricia Whitmore. "Once he signs, we won't have to deal with him after the wedding. Just push him across the finish line." My blood ran ice cold, the pen froze in my hand. It was a sniper's bullet, precise and devastating. Before I could fully process the sheer malice of the text, a second notification popped up rapid fire. This one from Ryan. "Just keep him calm. Play the daughter card until we get the approval. We'll handle the seating arrangements later, so he's out of the way." The puzzle pieces locked together with a sickening crunch. The dinner at Veritas, the lawyer's threat, Emily's sudden, desperate visit for soup. It hadn't been a negotiation. It hadn't been a frantic attempt to save the peace. It had been a highly coordinated, tactical manipulation. They had sent Emily to play the daughter card, to extract my signature, with the explicit intent of discarding me the moment I ceased to be useful to their aesthetic vision. I slowly set my fountain pen down. The ink would not flow today. I heard the bathroom door open. Emily walked back into the kitchen, drying her hands on a towel, offering a tentative smile. The smile died on her lips the second she saw my face. My expression was an absolute void. I looked like a man who had just ordered an airstrike. "Dad," she asked, her voice faltering, "what's wrong?" I didn't speak. I simply reached out with one scarred finger and tapped the glowing screen of her phone, turning it slightly so it faced her directly. Emily looked down. I watched the color completely drain from her face. Her eyes widened, scanning the brutal, unambiguous text messages. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She didn't reach for the phone. She just stared at it, as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike. Her voice was a fragile whisper. "I didn't know they sent that." "I swear, Dad, I didn't know." "I believe you," I said softly, the anger entirely absent from my voice, replaced by a profound sorrow. She finally grabbed the phone, her hands shaking so violently she nearly dropped it. She unlocked the screen and opened the group chat. Her thumb scrolled rapidly upward, reviewing the history of the conversation. Her breathing became jagged and uneven. She wasn't acting. I knew my daughter. The further she scrolled, the more the architecture of her life crumbled around her. "Oh my God," she gasped, tears flooding her eyes. "There are more. They've been talking like this for weeks." She dropped the phone onto the table and collapsed into the chair, burying her face in her hands, sobbing with a raw, agonizing intensity. The Whitmores had played her. They had weaponized her love for me, using her as a blunt instrument to bypass the trust's security protocols. "They kept saying they were trying to fix things," she cried, her voice muffled by her hands. "They told me you were just being stubborn. They said if I stayed calm and talked to you, everything would work out." "I know," I said gently. I didn't offer platitudes. I let her feel the full weight of the betrayal. Sometimes a controlled burn is the only way to clear a diseased forest. After several long, brutal minutes, she looked up, her face streaked with tears and flushed with a sudden, desperate hope. She looked at the open file, the blank signature line, and the pen resting beside it. So, she whispered, her voice trembling, will you sign it now? We can just get it over with. The question hit me like a physical blow. Even now, after seeing their absolute treachery, she was still conditioned to surrender. I reached out and slowly, definitively, closed the Whitmore file. I can't sign this, Emily. She stared at me in disbelief. Dad, please, if I go back without this, neither of us will know whether they're apologizing, because they mean it, or because they need something. I finished for her, my hand resting heavily on the closed folder. She stood up so quickly, her chair shrieked against the linoleum floor. The sorrow vanished, replaced by a sudden defensive anger. You think I'm just like them? No, I said firmly. Then why are you doing this? She screamed, tears flying from her eyes. Why are you punishing me for their texts? I'm trying to protect both of us, I said, my voice unwavering. No, you've already made up your mind. She grabbed her purse, frantically stuffing her phone inside. You're just as stubborn and arrogant as they are. I came here because I thought you still believed in me. I do believe in you, Emily. She looked at me, a long, heartbreaking glare that felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Maybe they were right about you, she whispered. She turned and ran out the front door. It slammed shut with finality. I stood alone in the kitchen. The soup was cold, the file was closed. I had held the line, but the cost was devastating. I had protected the integrity of the trust, but I had driven my daughter directly back into enemy territory. But a combat engineer knows that sometimes you have to let the enemy advance past the wire before you detonate the charges. The Whitmores thought they had won. They were about to discover exactly how wrong they were. The following week was an exercise in radio silence. The Whitmore family executed a complete communications blackout, a tactic designed to demoralize. Emily didn't call. Ryan didn't text. Patricia vanished. But a combat engineer knows that when the enemy goes silent, they are maneuvering. On Friday morning, Laura walked into my office holding a printed email. You need to see this, Daniel. I took the paper. The sender was Patricia Whitmore, addressed to the Oakage Manor event coordinator. It stated the Whitmores were voluntarily moving the wedding to an exclusive country club because the trust had become hostile and completely unprofessional. I read the message twice. They canceled it themselves 3 days ago. Laura nodded grimly. And they never told us. She handed me a second envelope from our legal counsel. Inside was a formally drafted timeline documenting the exact sequence of events, the receipt of the application, the missing code of event conduct, the aggressive threat from Ryan's attorney, the lack of any official denial from the trust, and finally, the applicant's voluntary withdrawal. It was a sterile, factual annihilation of the Whitmores' narrative. That Saturday evening, the rehearsal dinner was unfolding at the new country club. My invitation had been rescinded. I was sitting on my porch when my phone rang. Mr. Brooks, Laura said, her voice tight. I apologize for calling on a weekend. Miss Brooks contacted the office this afternoon. She requested the complete approval file for her wedding. I gave it to her, including the legal timeline. I thought she deserved facts, not rumors. Thank you, Laura, I said softly. So did I. I spent the next hour pacing. I couldn't control the detonation. I could only wait for the shockwave. Emily told me the details later. The dinner was a glittering affair of white roses and champagne. Patricia spun a fabricated tale of an unreasonable trust board that forced them to relocate. Ryan played the resilient groom. When it was time for toasts, Ryan stood. I want to thank everyone who supported us through a few unexpected complications this week, he announced smoothly. Families aren't always easy. Sometimes you have to decide whether you're building a future or staying trapped in the past. Polite applause rippled through the room. Emily reached into her purse. She pulled out the manila envelope, unclasped it, and stood up. She walked over to Ryan and placed the official timeline on the table. Application received, she read aloud, her voice carrying over the silence. Missing required conduct agreement, no denial issued. Ryan frowned. Emily, what is this? She dropped the second document. Copy of Ryan's attorney threatening legal action against the trust. Patricia leaned forward, paling. Where did you get these? Emily ignored her, dropping Patricia's cancellation request. Cancellation submitted 48 hours before any final decision existed. Finally, she placed the chairman's signature page on the table. Blank, below the line the printed name read, Chairman Daniel Brooks. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. Emily looked directly at Patricia. You canceled the venue before my father even finished his review. You told everyone he refused to cooperate. Ryan reached out, panicked. Emily, please. He was being completely unreasonable. He was doing his job, Emily fired back. And you threatened to sue him for it. Ryan's facade finally shattered, cornered. He resorted to the only weapon he understood. Cruelty. Without my family, he spat. You'd still be a blue-collar nobody. The insult hung in the air, heavy and toxic. Emily reached down, slipped the heavy diamond engagement ring off her finger, and placed it next to Ryan's wine glass. I'd rather be a nobody with my father, she said softly. She turned and walked out of the ballroom, leaving the Whitmore empire in ruins. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. Dad, she sobbed. I chose too late. No, sweetheart. I said, my vision blurring. You chose now. The next morning, an unrelenting Ohio rain washed over the city. I was drinking coffee when I saw her standing at the end of my driveway, soaked to the bone. I opened the front door. We stood there for a second. Come in, honey, I smiled. The soup's getting cold. She stepped inside, collapsing into the familiar warmth of the house. We sat at the kitchen table. She reached into her pocket and placed a small, brass house key on the table. The spare key I had given her when she left for college. I don't deserve this anymore, she whispered. I trusted them instead of you. I gently pushed the key back. Emily, it was never the house I trusted you with. It was my heart. She broke down then. The final release of months of manipulation, and I simply stayed there, holding the line until the storm passed. Healing took time, but the foundation was solid again. 2 years later, Emily introduced me to Michael, a high school history teacher who drove a battered sedan. When he asked for my blessing to marry Emily, he did it sitting on my back porch, with no performance and zero arrogance. Their wedding was held in my backyard, under the shade of the old maple trees. As the acoustic guitar began to play, Emily slipped her arm through mine. You okay, Dad? She asked. I'll survive. She stopped just before we walked down the aisle, squeezing my arm tightly. I'm walking in with the person who never stopped choosing me, she said. I couldn't speak. I simply kissed her forehead and led her forward. Looking back, I don't regret refusing to sign those papers. The Whitmores believed respect could be bought, and compliance demanded. But respect isn't built in a day, and it certainly isn't bought with a diamond. It's built on a foundation of absolute, unyielding integrity. And a foundation like that, it never crumbles.